Let's talk about that man of the hour. You were just hitting that, and that's Dak Prescott. Obviously, there's some different injury concerns, all that. But man, last year he was averaging 371 passing yards per start, pacing out to nearly 6,000 yards on the season had he stayed healthy. The offense posted 17, 40, 31, 39, and 37 points in his first 5 weeks. So 32.8 per game, insane, would have led the NFL. And his 27.8 fantasy points per game was the most in fantasy last year. So obviously this guy blew up. What do you think kind of led to this explosion in 2020? And if he's healthy, do you expect it to be more of the same next year?
I think Dak really took a step offensively in 2019, and we saw that. We certainly saw it early on. I think the first 3 games of that season, he didn't have an incompletion in the third quarter. There was a lot of things. Kellen Moore, his offensive coordinator, John Kitna was his quarterback's coach. There was just a lot of things mechanically for him that started to kind of click and work. It was his first full season with Amari Cooper, so you can certainly throw that in the mix. Michael Gallup took a step as a second-year player. I mean, a lot of stars aligning, no pun intended. Last year specifically, their defense was so bad, and obviously those are really advantageous situations from a fantasy perspective. Get the elite quarterback who can throw and put up a bunch of stats, whose defense is awful. I think the game against Seattle they played was just kind of Dak and Russ going back and forth, and a lot of people have talked about how he was on pace to throw for 6,000 yards and 50 whatever touchdowns. I don't think that would have sustained itself. I do think there would have been some regression to the mean. I think things would have stabilized. And so I think that in terms of Dak's talent and who he is and how he can lead the Cowboys to wins, I certainly think he's taken a step forward. I certainly think he's more than ready to do that again in 2021. But I do think that their defense is better just because it's hard, as my dog agrees, not to be that bad again. And so I do think that overall their team will be very different in terms of not being in those situations every week.
I got you. Yeah, exactly. I remember there was, for a while in DFS, I think those first 5 weeks, the winning quarterback and the millionaire maker was either Dak himself or whoever was facing the Cowboys. It was just insane how those back and forth battles were happening. So if the defense does improve, that would give them less cause to just completely huck as they have. Do you think it is justified that he's going top 6, though, among fantasy quarterbacks? Do you still think he'll have some of those explosive days, even if the defense does step up a bit?
So give me a minute. The FedEx truck is here, and that's what my dog. He's super protective. Sorry about that.
No worries. We got 6 questions already. Why don't you go do what you got to do? I'll answer some questions. Keep my eye out for you.
The truck is passing by, but I think that we see this every year. And I think last year we saw Lamar Jackson get really overdrafted. Every year now you see Patrick Mahomes get overdrafted, and those players are obviously really special. I just don't want to pay that price. And as great as Dak was such a great value last year because of where he was going. And I think that, that's happened. I think a lot of people have caught up to that, though. I would not pay that price. I do see one of my fantasy league mates in this chat, by the way. So Noah, you are not allowed to take anything I'm saying and use it in a month when we have our draft. But I would not draft him in the top 6 just because I don't want to pay that price for Dak myself.
I gotcha. Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of Noah, Dak will be the comeback player of the year. Not a doubt in my mind, he says. So he's coming in here trying to pick your brain as much as he can. I love that. That's the one thing that's always tough about running a fantasy blog is because all your picks get out there for everybody. And I do an auction league too. So all the prices continue to get jacked up on the guys I'm going after. But the other thing with Dak that I did want to make sure to hit is we got this shoulder injury. He hasn't been practicing, as you said at the top. He's been doing some sprints, perhaps for the cameras, perhaps for himself. Who really knows what it is? Should we be worried about this shoulder injury? What are your thoughts on it?
So first of all, my dog has settled down, so thanks again for powering through it. I don't know what package we got, but it better be worth it. So I mean, I'm not worried about it, honestly. In fact, I'm a little encouraged that Dak is mindful of that. And I think that that's something that translates into his fantasy relevance. When he had the press conference where he celebrated his new contract, because that's something that, we've been talking Dak so much at Blogging the Boys and doing different podcasts and things like that. And nobody has even brought up that he got paid this offseason. That does feel like something that's forgotten. But when that happened, he mentioned how he will be a little bit more mindful about things because he realizes the financial commitment that the Cowboys have made to him. And so, Dak got injured trying to pick up a first down with his legs. And Dak hasn't always or really ever been the most dynamic mobile quarterback in terms of fantasy relevance. He's certainly more valuable than a Matthew Stafford or, kind of more traditional pocket quarterbacks. But I do think that element to his game will be dialed back. And I think that what he's dealing with right now is sort of emblematic of that. He mentioned that he just didn't feel right and he didn't want to make something small turn into something serious. And so I think that overall disposition will be reflected in how he acts and not how he plays and that he'll be timid or anything like that. But I do think that he'll be a little bit more cognizant of where he is and how he is and operating in a way that keeps himself viable for the team so that they can win every week, which is obviously something they struggled at last season.
Absolutely. And we'll close out Dak's conversation here with his line for 2021. 4,795.5 yards and 32.5 TDs. You hitting the over, the under, you're mixing it up for these. What are your thoughts?
That's tough. I mean, that's a lot of yards, and I'm really, this is gonna be such an interesting fantasy season, and I'm sure it's been really interesting for you to kind of put projections together because of the 17th game.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the Cowboys specifically, I believe they play 4 NFC East games over their final 6 weeks, and so they're not, as bad as this division is, it's not like they can really wrap it up, in early December. They're going to have to play, 16 full games, maybe even that 17th full game to ultimately win the NFC title if they want to. I still don't think that I would take the under on yards and touchdowns probably just because, wow. I don't think their defense is going to be great, but I think it's going to be better. And I think that they don't want to play that way. That's not a sustain. It's a fun way for fantasy. It's great for daily. But Mike McCarthy is on record as not wanting to run the ball or establish the run, but wanting to be balanced. And I think that's a key. It's so hard to just have a quarterback throw 50 times week in and week out and win over and over and over again. So I don't think the Cowboys want to do that. I do think that Dak will have some great games. I think he'll have a week where he throws for 320 and 4 touchdowns and maybe has an extra rushing touchdown and maybe wins you your daily league that week. But I don't think it's going to be this big time thing. I think that the smart bet there is the under, but because of the Cowboys, everybody leans over and everybody looks at his wide receivers and everybody says, well, they can all go for 1,000 yards. Sure, they totally can, but I think what people don't realize is the right things, or rather the wrong things, have to happen for you to have 3,000-yard receivers. You got to be trailing in games. You got to be in shootouts. I mean, it's got to be a situation that lends itself to that happening. And I just don't think that the football of it all happens that way for the Cowboys this year.
Well, as fantasy fans, I hate to say it to you Cowboys fans looking out there, I hope your defense continues to suck because it was so much fun week in and week out seeing those shootouts. But it does make total sense if they did it. I mean, wasn't it every single draft pick, or at least the first 5 or 6 went to defense, right? It
was the first 6, and actually the first time in Dallas Cowboys franchise history that they spent their first 6 picks on the defensive side of the ball. And they also changed coordinators. Really, all the primary free agents they brought in. They did bring in a swing tackle, but I mean, everything was done to address the defensive side of the ball. And even if they hadn't done that, I mean, there is regression to the mean in the NFL. Anybody that's really bad or really great at one thing in one season, they do regress to the mean just because it's so hard to either be that great or that bad. And so even just like we've said so often this offseason, we've joked well, they won't be that bad because it would be impossible to be that bad again. But some of that's true. I mean, some of it really is true. And plus their schedule is really advantageous from a defensive standpoint. That's the thing. I think people can, maybe play smart against their league mates. It starts off rough for the Cowboys. They play the Buccaneers and Tom Brady. They play the Chargers and Justin Herbert. But after that, it settles down. I mean, it really doesn't get bad until the week before Thanksgiving when they play the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. And so, maybe I think it might. I wouldn't stash the Cowboys defense, but I could, there are stretches where I think you could ride them out, especially near the end of the season when they're playing nothing but NFC East teams. Interesting
for sure. You don't think of the Cowboys with defense these days, but all these moves were made. So potentially that'll hinder Dak more than I think a lot of people are expecting. What is up, you fantasy wolf? Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, share your thoughts in the comments, check out some more videos, and join the newest Wolfpack by subscribing below.